currently the chair of the ICJW Asia Pacific region. She has been actively involved in interfaith activities, including establishing the Jewish Christian Muslim Association Women's Committee and convening the first two conferences of the organization. In 2019, she led a group of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim women to Jerusalem. In 2009, Di received an OAM for her voluntary work with NCJW Australia and for her interfaith work. She's also a board member of the EHE Rare Cancer Foundation Australia. Di believes that interfaith and intercultural activities are vital for people of other faiths to learn about Jews and Judaism, and for us to learn about people from other cultures and faiths. She's therefore very well positioned to enlarge upon the current situation in Australia and the questions that have been posed. Stand up there. Okay, can everyone hear me then? Yes? No? No?
Speak louder.
No? No? You want to take this, or it'll be too many things? Okay, we'll move that away. That's fine.
You have to talk loud.
Yes, right. Okay, I'm going to be talking about the Australian situation since October 7, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background about the Jewish community in Australia. So there's been a Jewish presence in Australia from the time of the first European settlement, when 16 Jews arrived in the first fleet in 1788. Since then, the number of Jews in Australia has steadily increased, with a large influx before the Holocaust in the 1930s, an even larger influx after the Holocaust in the 1940s and 50s, and then immigrations from the former Soviet Union and South Africa from the 1980s on. Today we are the 9th largest Jewish community in the world, with about 120,000 people around Australia. Before October 7, Jewish Australians lived mostly peaceful lives, with relatively few instances of anti-Semitism. The Executive Council of Australian Jewry, ECAJ, produces a comprehensive report on anti-Semitism in Australia each year. The ECAJ report that was researched, written and compiled by Julie Nathan, and some of you may remember Julie, she was on the Anti-Semitism Committee here, shows that in the 10 years prior to October 7, 2023, number of reported incidents had increased from 231 in 2013 to 495 as of September 30th, 2023. These incidents included physical assaults, vandalism, verbal abuse, graffiti, messages such as phone calls, voicemail, texts, emails, and postal mail, and posters and stickers. After October 7, the number of reported incidents more than tripled to 2,062 for the year ended September 30, 2024, compared to the previous year's 495. And the nature of the incidents since October 7 has been more violent and more overt. According to Julie Nathan, during the 12 months following October 7, there have been many new forms and expressions of anti-Semitism not experienced before in Australia. The Hamas massacre in Israel on the 7th of October 2023 acted as a signal, a green light for many Islamists and left-wing extremists that it was open season on Jews, as evidenced by the overt hatred and the surge in the number of incidents. October 7 emboldened many to act on their hatred of Jews. Two events set the tone for the next 12 months. In Lakemba, a Western Sydney suburb, on the 8th of October, one day after the massacre in Israel, Sheikh Ibrahim Dawood, addressing a large protest rally organised by Hizbut ut-Tahrir, glorified the murder of Jews in Israel and exultantly shouted to the crowd, I'm elated. It's a day of courage. It's a day of resistance. It's a day of pride. It's a day of victory. In Sydney, on the 9th of October, outside the iconic Sydney Opera House, an anti-Israel mob gathered, set off flares and chanted, "F the Jews, where's the Jews?" and according to several witnesses, "Gas the Jews," while police stood by watching. That protest was planned and publicly advertised by the Palestine Action Group Sydney on the 7th of October at 8:04 p.m, while the Hamas murder of Jews was still going on. This protest was the first of many street protests in Australian cities that were held in many city centres each weekend throughout the year. Two other major events occurred that directly impacted the Jewish community. And I'm not telling you everything that happened, I'd be here all day. After the Jews were falsely accused of arson against a Palestinian Australian-owned burger shop in Caulfield, a suburb of Melbourne where I was living, a large mob of anti-Israel protesters descended on a nearby park, opposite a synagogue on Friday evening, the 10th of November 2023. A riot broke out, rocks and other projectiles were thrown towards Jews outside the synagogue, and the synagogue had to be evacuated for the safety of the congregants. My husband, daughter, and young granddaughters witnessed this mob marching down the street. Also in Melbourne, on the 19th of May 2024, many Jews attempting to attend the Never Again Is Now rally against anti-Semitism were accosted and physically assaulted by an anti-Israel mob, blocking their way in the central business district. Other incidents involved convoys of vehicles flying Palestinian flags, which drove through suburbs in Sydney, which have a high proportion of Jewish residents. Jewish-owned shops and small businesses were targeted with graffiti, some with the Hamas inverted red triangle indicating a Jewish target. There were many death threats against individual Jews and Jewish community organisations. The doxing of 600 Jewish creatives in a WhatsApp that they had formed to provide mutual support against anti-Semitism resulted in many of them losing their jobs or their small businesses being targeted, with some having to move their home to other suburbs for safety. Many of the anti-Jewish incidents during the period in review were by anti-Israel groups, a mix of groups identifying as Arab and or Muslim, and groups identifying as left-wing progressives. Some of the other anti-Jewish incidents were carried out by right-wing anti-Semites, including neo-Nazis, or by unaffiliated anti-Semites. While many anti-Israel incidents are offensive and consist of false and libelous claims, the ECAJ does not include such incidents as anti-Jewish unless there is a clear and specific anti-Jewish element. For example, placing anti-Israel or pro-Palestine graffiti, stickers, etc. on a synagogue, or yelling "Free Palestine" at people simply because they have been identified, rightly or wrongly, as Jewish. Or placards, for example, etc., using older anti-Jewish tropes cloaked in anti-Zionist terms. For example, Zionists control the government. In October 2024, a kosher deli in Bondi, suburb of Sydney, was set alight. In December 2024, the Adass Israel Synagogue in Ripponlea in Melbourne was set on fire in the early hours of the morning, and it was completely destroyed. This was a frightening escalation of anti-Jewish incidents. A few weeks later, a childcare centre adjacent to a synagogue and school in Maroubra, a suburb of Sydney, was firebombed, and also a house formerly owned by the CEO of the ECAJ, Alex Rivchin, was set alight together with cars parked outside. Other cars have been torched. Jewish schools and places of worship have been targeted with graffiti, including my granddaughter's school, Mount Scopus College. In February 2025, the ASIO Director General Mike Burgess declared anti-Semitism Australia's leading threat to life. and ASIO is the Australian equivalent of the FBI or MI5. ASIO found evidence that linked the Delhi and synagogue arson attacks to Iran, and in August this year, the Iranian ambassador to Australia was ordered to leave the country. On the 9th of July 2024, the Australian government announced the appointment of Gillian Segal as Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism in Australia, in response to the alarming rise in anti-Semitic incidents, which were growing increasingly violent. A year later, in July this year, Jill Segal presented her report, Plan to Combat Anti-Semitism, a policy-oriented framework for government and the Australian community to the Prime Minister, and no action has yet been carried out. The plan covers a broad range of areas, and I'll give a list of them. Law reform, training and enforcement, education, awareness and public discourse, institutional accountability and university reform, security, law enforcement and coordination, digital governance and online regulation, culture, arts and public broadcasting, general community education about anti-Semitism and cohesion building, migration and citizenship, multicultural and interfaith engagement, global interaction and engagement, vibrancy and protection of Jewish life, and community consultation, monitoring, evaluation, and data collection. So you can see it's a very comprehensive plan. In September 2024, the Australian government also announced the appointment of a special envoy to combat Islamophobia in Australia, Mr. Aftad Malik. He released his report a few weeks ago with a number of recommendations, including a call for 2 inquiries into Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism. It was as if the Australian government could not reach out to the Jewish community without also reaching out to the Muslim community. The Muslim population in Australia is over 1 million, and the Australian population is 27 million. So they represent roughly 3.7% of the population. So it's about 9 times the size of the Australian Jewish population. And they have a lot of political power. Sadly, the Australian government has not been shown to be the great friend of Israel that it once was. Australia always used to support Israel in voting at the United Nations, but this is not the case today. Indeed, in the UN vote calling for the establishment of Israel in 1947, Australia was the first nation to say yes. In the recent UN vote to recognise the state of Palestine, Australia shamefully voted in favour. Our current Labor Prime Minister and Foreign Minister have been openly critical of Israel's conduct in Gaza. The Australian Jewish community is deeply concerned by this change and their lack of support for Israel and inaction in combating the alarming rise in anti-Semitism in Australia. There are many words of support, but not enough action. As has been seen on many university campuses around the world, the anti-Semitism on Australian campuses has been very alarming. Pro-Palestine encampments at some universities took up residence on university open spaces, brandishing signs such as "Zionists not welcome here." Organisers call for the universities to disclose, divest and cut ties with weapons manufacturers linked to Israel. Some protesters occupied and vandalised the offices of a Jewish professor in Melbourne who led a joint PhD program between Jerusalem and Melbourne. A few weeks ago, my granddaughter, who's aged 10, was on a school excursion to the Melbourne Museum. The group she was in was subject to anti-Semitic slurs from another school group of teenagers. This type of incident would never have happened before. Now these random incidents are almost normalised. In August this year, 100,000 people marched across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I'm sure you all saw these photos. In the so-called March for Humanity, they called it. And there were other marches around Australia. They could hardly be called marches for humanity when images of the Ayatollah were carried, as well as the flags of Hamas and ISIS. The organisers of these marches were the same people who organised the regular anti-Israel protests and marches in our cities. The Australian Jewish community has held many rallies around the nation in support of Israel since October 7. This has also given people the opportunity to support one another in this very difficult and traumatic time. In Victoria, where I live, the Jewish Community Council established an anti-Semitism support service very early on, where people could report incidents of anti-Semitism as well as to the community security group. The support service also offered counselling to people affected by events in Israel and Australia who felt they needed to talk to someone about how they were feeling. And the National Council of Jewish Women Australia has also established such a support service. Until a few weeks ago, when the last remaining living hostages were released, rallies were held every week calling for the return of the hostages, with their photos prominently displayed. The rallies were halted with the ceasefire on the assumption that all hostages would be returned as promised. However, we are still waiting for the final hostages to be returned. The organisation Never Again Is Now was established in Australia following the alarming rise of anti-Semitism by a Christian pastor, Mark Leach, and he's actually given up his pastorship, if that's a word, to concentrate full time on this organisation, Never Again Is Now. A grassroots movement with people from a diverse range of backgrounds and faiths who are committed to confronting and ending anti-Semitism in Australia. They have organised meetings and rallies to show their support, which has been very heartwarming, especially as a counterweight to the weekly hate-filled demonstrations and protests, which have been allowed every week in some of our main cities, growing in number and marching through city streets, calling for an end to the so-called genocide, death to the IDF, and all the pro-Palestinian chants which call for the destruction of Israel. A few months ago, a collection of essays was published in Australia entitled Ruptured. I have one copy here. 36 Jewish women reflected on how their world has changed since October 7. The editors expressed it well. The feeling among Jewish people in Australia, as the essays in this book reveal, is that of a profound existential rupture, which is similar to what Judy was saying. They hope that this collection can help to repair the rupture between our community and the world by offering opportunities to hear and understand Jewish experiences. Jewish women in the creative arts have been particularly affected as their so-called friends turned away. Concerts and appearances were cancelled or disrupted and businesses targeted. The National Council of Jewish Women Australia, and in particular our president, Linda Ben-Menashe, has reached out to many non-Jews, especially women, and in the process developed many strong relationships with allies, including female opinion leaders and decision makers from the wider community, and many Iranian and Ukrainian women also. They have held many boardroom luncheons, salons in private homes, and resilience workshops. Linda Ben-Menashe and also Natalie Samia, who is the Vice President of the New South Wales section of National Council, gave testimony at the New South Wales Parliamentary Inquiry into Anti-Semitism. In May, Linda led a solidarity volunteering mission to Israel with 3 non-Jewish women in the group of 20. The National Council Board has established an Allies Committee which launched a petition for non-Jewish Australian women to sign. In conclusion, the Australian Jewish community has had a rude awakening over the past 2 years to the extent of the underlying anti-Semitism among us. It has been very unsettling, especially for Jews such as myself, with no Holocaust background in my own family. I've always felt very Australian, and I still do. I'm 4th generation Australian. On my mother's side. I think for me, one of the most unsettling things is that as a Jew, I haven't felt as supported by my government and those who are meant to protect us. As I thought would be the case. The tolerance of hate speech in the need to protect free speech in a democratic society does not protect us until the hate speech becomes action and then it's too late. In terms of hope, there are many non-Jews in Australia who support our community. Some have reached out, but the silent majority is just that. My own interfaith activities have been curtailed, but I hope one day that will turn around. Our community is resilient. Hineni, we are still here and we're not going anywhere. For many Jews in Australia, our Jewishness has actually been strengthened.
Thank you so much, Di, for your
Not much hope.
It was thought-provoking. And I have to say, on a personal level, I have some familiarity with the Australian Jewish community. And to me, the events of the last 2 years in that country has been extremely shocking and really so unexpected, so unexpected. So I see already that Sarah wants a question. I just will say that we'll take questions and comments from the audience, but as we really don't have a lot of time, please keep to short remarks, but it's very, very important. Okay.
Thank you very much for the micro. But we've heard about Europe, we've heard about the United States, we've heard about Australia. And I just wanted to say a few words about Latin America. We are 20 countries in Latin America. So it's going to be very short because I didn't prepare anything. But the Jewish reaction in Latin America was unanimous. Unanimous, our heart in Israel, our feeling of support, our feeling of trying to see whatever they need and sending whatever they need. The governments reacted in different ways. We have Colombia with Petro that says that this is a genocide, forget it. We have Cuba, which doesn't say too much, but we know what they mean. We have Venezuela and Brazil that is so-so. But the rest of the countries, the governments were with Israel, which doesn't mean that anti-Semitism didn't rise terrible. I mean, it was unbelievable. In Uruguay, we had demonstrations of the pro-Palestine people in front of a Jewish school when the kids were going out. That's just an example. I mean, we always asked ourselves, where do they get the money? Who is financing all this big pro-Palestine campaign all over the world? Because the Palestinians don't have any money. That's what I understood. So somebody is really financing this. All the flags, all the demonstrations, everything. We do know that the left and the radical left parties are helping. But what I just wanted to say to all,
country behind it.
yeah.
It's called Qatar. It's not the left or the right.
Okay.
It's those. No.
But what I wanted to say, and I don't want to take any more time, to our Israeli friends here, is that the world was with you and with Israel. I'm Israel High.
Well said. That was a very important addition, and it was just a matter of time not to include Latin America, not because we have any bias, so, but that was really very important that you added that. Anybody else for comments? Yes, please. Sarah?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So, unfortunately, I also haven't prepared, but I did want to represent South Africa's response because it was so shameful and so shocking to the Jewish community in South Africa. So we also experienced, we also have a large Muslim population that's very vocal. We have protests all the time, especially in the Jewish areas. They ride through the streets with Palestinian flags. Our security, we've always had a lot of Jewish security. It's not state funded. We have our own private security. We have the community security organization, but in Cape Town, where I live, we have very good relations with the security forces in the city, with the police, etc. And then there's obviously the shameful actions of the South African government, which I don't think are in line with the people of South Africa. I definitely think exactly what you said earlier about Qatar funding or Iranian funding. The South African government has a very good relationship with Iran. And the case that was launched against Israel in the International Court of Justice, and that was really a very big shock to the Jewish community. It was also done in a very deceptive way, because there's a number of things that have to be done before you can launch a case. For example, I don't know all the procedures, I'm not a lawyer, but you have to have exhausted every other avenue with that country. You have to have at least spoken to Israel, and there are a number of things. So what they did as a pretext was they called our National Board of Deputies into a meeting. So in South Africa also we had rising anti-Semitism, nothing of the level that's been happening in other places around the world, because in South Africa I think most people have good feelings towards Israel, not negative feelings. It's the opposite in our country. There is a very loud radical voice that engage in the protests, but we also have Christian Zionists who stood outside our parliament for 25 years holding Israeli flags and singing Hebrew songs, and that community is a large community in South Africa. So, but there had been some form of rising anti-Semitism, and the Board of Deputies had been wanting to make a presentation to the government on that. So they'd, since even before October the 7th, they had been asking for a meeting with the government. Eventually, on the 27th of December 2023, the meeting's granted. Now, in South Africa, our summer holidays are in December. Between Christmas and New Year, nothing happens. But they decide that this meeting is going to be happening. So everyone from the National Board comes back from their holiday for the meeting. And in the meeting, they present the rising accounts of anti-Semitism in a presentation. And right at the end, Naledi Pandor, who at the time was our Minister of Foreign Relations, who has, made an infamous call to Hamas like days after October the 7th, mentioned something in passing about Israel committing war crimes. And as they're leaving the office, and they used that as the pretext that they had consulted about this issue to launch their case. So it was a massive betrayal of the Jewish community, which has had good relations generally with the government. Over time, we always felt secure and had good relations. I remember when this president, Cyril Ramaphosa, came to the largest synagogue in Cape Town to address us when he first came into power. People were having he had a house in Fresnay, which is near Sea Point, and people took their photos with him on the beachfront. People liked him, had been in business with him, all sorts of things, and then this massive turnaround and using, his going to election rallies in a kafir and all these kinds of things. So I just wanted to just share that.
Very important.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. We'll have time, I think, for one more. Does anybody want to say anything, ask anything of our panelists? This is the time.
Scary, very scary. I have a question. Sorry.
Alice? No, Vivian has to give the vote.
I'm sorry, so.
No, Alice, Alice, you can still make one comment.
So we had overview of all continents except Europe. Yeah, Kakan spoke about Hungary, not about all the Europe.
We
Are
don't
you
have,
able to say do have Qatar some overview about all the Europe? You know?
all of
something
Europe
more
is a
about?
big target.
Europe is not unique, it is like a heterogeneous place. We cannot.
Again, it's an issue of time, Alice, it's not, you know, we could go through each and every country and have a seminar just on that.
Okay, no, because maybe it would be interesting to know about Europe. I just,
Do
from
you
my,
have some- do you wanna
from my
add
view,
something?
I can just say a few sentences that
Please.
Immediately after the October 7th, it was a huge solidarity, I think, in mostly European countries. Immediately after, a huge solidarity with Israel. We collected the money, we made the manifestations and meetings for supporting Israel. But after what Katalin told in Hungary, it was less and less and less, and Palestinian movement came out a little bit, not too much. Not in some countries very much, in some countries not so much, up to the government. But in, for example, in Czech Republic, we don't have Palestinians. We only have young students which are pro-Palestinian. So they make small meetings, and it is nothing huge because Czech Republic is supporting 100% Israel. But in another European country, it's very different, and so you can see in newspapers and so. So it is only maybe good to say something.
Thank
about
you,
Europe.
thank you very much, Alex. Again, we could go on and on, but I'd just like to remind us, no, I just have another couple of sentences to say. Bear with me, please. I just want to reiterate two phrases that I heard, I think from Judy, but I think that it takes on the general content. And that is that fractured communities that we have to understand and perhaps direct ourselves to the fact that Jewish communities have become fractured in many, many countries. This might be a new phenomenon in many respects. And the collateral damage of Israel's war. So, as we've seen though, the most blatant outcome of October 7th in Jewish communities has been the outburst of anti-Semitism and the rise of violence against Jews that crosses all spectrums. What might be accepted, and nobody touched on this, which is very interesting because I prepared myself for it, but what might be accepted as a legitimate protest against Israeli government policies has boiled over into the normalization of simple anti-Semitism. Anti-Israel sentiment erupts against individual Jews. Innocent people in synagogues and at Jewish events who have no word when it comes to setting Israeli policy, but as you have seen, are very, very much affected by those policies. I hope the insights shared by our speakers will help inspire further activities by ICJW leaders in Jewish communities to build a future rooted in shared resilience, but also in a healing process based on hope. Perhaps, too, we should set our sights on seeking partners who believe in true pluralism and peace and join with them in an effort to change minds, open hearts, and allow for hope to emerge. As we conclude this session, I again want to extend sincere thanks to each of our presenters and to all of you who have contributed your attention, insights, and questions. Today's discussion has underscored how layered and dynamic is the relationship that must be built among individuals and institutions in Jewish communal life, as well as the urgency of posing new questions to our communities. The future of global Jewish life and connection rests on a heightened sense of responsibility and careful vigilance, but also on a compassion and understanding within the global Jewish peoplehood that should fill us with hope. I therefore strongly encourage you to continue these conversations beyond this room. Thank you very much.
more things to say because you said everything. And but I just want to say that thank you very, very much for all the speeches. And I hope it will strengthen us that we meet in Israel and that we can be this women power together. Thank you very much.